The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered, even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. So humbling. So good morning. This is Stone Creek Zen Center's weekly Dharma talk. And this morning I have the personally and collective great joy of welcoming Crystal Johnson.
Thank you.
A meditation center originally, I think. She's for me, as somebody who is really an elder and a guide in being a white Dharma teacher challenging racism. If you want more information about Crystal, there's some on our website just about the program she's developed around this. And she's an incredibly skillful Dharma teacher, just generally, and also in this realm of talking about. And and Crystal, please say more if you would like. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Well, I'm super glad to be here this morning. Is the level of my sound okay, Sarah? Okay, great. So thank you so much for inviting me today. While this new life of onlineness has been really difficult in some ways, it also means that I get to spend time with people who I wouldn't get to spend time with otherwise. So there is some silver lining there. And I'm really happy to see some familiar faces, many new faces. If you can, I'd appreciate your leaving your video on. It helps me feel more connected if I can see actual faces. But if that's not possible for you, that's also totally fine, because I want you to be comfortable. So I'd first like to welcome everyone who's here, all bodies, all genders, all minds, all colors, all classes, all abilities, all cultures, all everyone. And I'm honored by your presence here. So thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for inviting me. So as you may have guessed, I'm a white, cisgendered, straight, middle-class woman of a certain age. And so my understanding is shaped and limited by my conditioning and by this lens through which I see the world. So if today I do or say something unskillful or something that offends or harms you, I hope you'll let me know. So you can either put it in the chat and Sarah will keep track of it and draw my attention to it, or you can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and speak out, bring it up in the Q&A. If it becomes clear later, you can send me an email. So I really want to learn with and from you, and this is a way that you can help me do that. So I appreciate any feedback that you can offer, and kind of letting me know like how sharing my own experience and my practice lands for you. So what I'd like to share today are some reflections on practicing during these what I've called historic and uncertain times, which I guess is really always true. They're always historic and they're always uncertain. But in particular, to talk about how I use my practice to navigate them in what I hope is a skillful way, and how the practice helps me to answer the question, how should I live my life in this moment, this precious human life? Because I'm not a monastic, obviously. I'm in the world. And so how should I engage in the world? How can I engage and not just get lost in the stories in my mind? Because there are lots of stories in my mind. The other thing that comes up for me right now is the idea that this might seem like a very political talk, which kind of surprises me to find myself speaking in this way, because I've always considered, or until pretty recently, considered myself not very political. And as some of you know, I've been thinking and talking about race and whiteness for some years now. I've been noticing how I've been raised up into a system that gives me a lot of privilege due to the color of my skin, or for that matter, my class, able-bodiedness, my citizenship status. And it's a system that actually harms people that have a different color of skin or a different or so-called lower social class. or people who aren't citizens. And so I've come to realize that my support is required for the current system to continue, and that I have some choices about whether to support a system of inequity and injustice or to take action to disrupt it. And so this investigation into how to disrupt it, how to act skillfully in a way that doesn't cooperate, that leads me to politics, because politics basically is government. And it's about, the policies that government creates. And it's through the process of government that resources are gathered and allocated, and some things are rewarded, some things are punished, some people are rewarded, some people punished, some needs are met, other needs aren't met. And I've also come to think that there is no neutral place to be, that there is actually no apolitical place. There's no place outside of politics. There's no neutral stance I can take. Like by doing nothing, I'm just kind of not harming. So I'm thinking whatever I do or don't do has an impact, and that even doing nothing or being apolitical is actually an action. And it's a little bit like when people say that talking about race is political because it violates the white norm of not talking about it. Because I would argue that not talking about race is just as political as talking about it, because it supports a culture of governance that supports the status quo. So it's political either way. So it's really, what's your choice of politics? So as I said, I'd like to offer some practice reflections, not to convince you that you should be political or even that you should see things the way that I see them. Rather, I'd like to tell you something about what my experience has been in these times and how I've used my practice and how that's led me to certain ways of acting and being and away from other ways. So I hope it'll be useful, and I'm looking forward to your reactions. So the first thing I notice about this moment is how easily my mind becomes agitated and how much time I spend wrapped up in the agitation, either just in the agitation or trying to get rid of the agitation. So I'm not even on social media. I don't know what would happen to me if I were on social media, but I seem to be on a lot of email lists. And I certainly noticed in the days running up to the election how the increasingly intense emails I received were really designed to agitate me, and they were very effective. So I got these emails that had these fake headlines like, Mitch McConnell loses, send money if you want to see this headline, or send money or the Democrats will never win another election ever. Kind of all these things that were kind of manipulative. Where I think I got one that said, Amy McGrath is in a dead heat with Mitch McConnell. And they had some poll that supposedly showed that. But in fact, I don't think that was true at all. I think it was just a ruse. And I started to notice how my mind would leap at each of these emails. My body would respond as if something concrete and physical was happening. And I really found it challenging to maintain some level of balance and equanimity, enough skillfulness, enough stillness to kind of try to figure out, well, what is skillful actually? Because, just running around in circles and like being upset, I think this is not super productive or helpful. So on election day, I didn't look at the news that day. I was too agitated, and I really felt like there wasn't anything I could do at that point to affect the outcome. So I was, trying to clean the house and do yard work and all these things to kind of distract myself. And then I thought, well, let me just notice. Let me just look at what I'm trying to distract myself from. And so as much as I could, I just turned my attention to what was actually happening in my body, in my heart, in my mind, because of course the breath was still present. I was still breathing and my heart was still beating, at least for now. And so kind of what was it that was going on? And so, of course, I noticed there's a lot of tension. There was pressure, there was hardness. Like I have a lot of arthritis in my joints, and it seemed like I could feel every single one of them. In terms of emotions, there was a lot of fear, of anger, hope, despair, grief, and then just lots and lots of thoughts, lots of beliefs and impulses. And I sort of started to try to keep track of like the stories that were occupying my mind. So stories like, this is terrible. If Trump wins, everything is lost. I'll have to go to Canada. Because I know the Canadians are just very excited about having lots of people like me move to Canada. Another story, the people voting for Trump are bad, they're mistaken, they're foolish, and I'm better than they are. My side is the right side, and yet I'm losing. Or the idea, it's an emergency, it's a catastrophe, or I have to get away from this experience, I can't stand it, it's too much, but of course I can stand it. I am standing it. The choice I have is to stand it mindfully or not mindfully. And so just observing this kind of helped me. And then I stopped and I looked around, and I live in kind of a rural area. And I live at the edge of a redwood forest. And so when I actually looked around me, mostly what I saw was sun and trees. And I live among a lot of non-voters, chickadees and osprey. And I have bear and deer who travel my property, and consider my garden food for them, or my cat food for them. I've got mountain lions, quail, foxes, lots of chipmunks, all kinds of stuff. And the other day I identified a red-shafted flicker for the first time. So it's a very sweet experience to kind of come into the awareness of being part of this larger system, this system which is not on the internet, but it's just like physically around me. And to see myself as part of this much larger system, this vast unfolding of causes and conditions, the sense of myself as one being among infinite numbers of beings. And so this helped me to just be more mindful of the agitation in my mind, to the impulse to push the experience away or to shut it down, to go dormant somehow until the election results came in. And so instead I turned towards it, and I turned towards it with kindness, like, you poor agitated mind. I noticed the jumping from thought to thought, from story to story, and just noticing like things are really busy in there, and I'm just, I'm literally sitting on a redwood stump, and, my mind is kind of on fire. And so I realized, well, okay, so I can just identify with this stormy mind. I can just like be in it, or I can observe it. I can take care of my mind. I can, go on with my day, whether the mind is stormy or not. So a central part of the practice is to see clearly. It's to be fully present for whatever's happening. And a central part of our practice is to work for the liberation of all beings. And yet we live in stories. We live in delusion. We're raised into a story, and we're taught that this is the story of who we are. It might be a story of gender, of race, of class. We're taught many stories about how the world is, what's required of us, what it means to be a good person, what's really true. And we learn to act upon these stories and to lead certain kinds of lives, to see ourselves and others in a certain way, as if there's an inherent reality out there and we are observing it. Well, that's true until we meet the Buddha, and now all bets are off. Because the Buddha advises us that these are views, and that living them as reality brings suffering. And that there's a way out of this suffering, which is to let go of that. The Buddha invites us to see the stories for what they are, to not get lost in them, to discern ways of living that reduce harm, to focus on practicing generosity, to speak wisely, or as Thich Nhat Hanh advises, to keep in touch with the suffering of the world so that compassion will arise in us and guide our actions. And so this is beautiful guidance, I think. Beautiful guidance offered by this practice. And so with this in mind, I turn back to observing the stories in my mind. And one of the big themes was winning and losing, good guys and bad guys. And it became apparent that Biden would win. I felt excited, exultant. I also felt superior, right? I felt superior to those ignorant and misguided people who could vote for Trump. I felt powerful, like, oh, now we'll show them, now we'll get something done. I felt relieved, like, oh, everything's going to be fine now, as if a single election is going to make everything fine. But this way of mistaking things, rather than this is just one more step in the arising and passing of phenomena, kind of clinging to some kind of reality that, okay, now things are better. And so then I also reflected on the closeness of the vote, the division of the United States into red and blue, or white and BIPOC, or rich and poor. I noticed which side I felt I was on, how willing my mind was to characterize the other side as different from myself. I noticed myself seeking safety in the fantasy of superiority, that like my team is better and I am part of the better team. And all of this was a way of kind of protecting myself from the experience of just being this tiny little speck, sort of buffeted about by this infinite unfolding of causes and conditions. If I could just cling tightly enough to the I-ness, to the me, I would somehow be safe. I'd be safe because my side had won. And of course, that's just not true, right? Life is not so simple. And so then the question arises, okay, so given that all this is going on, given that my mind is, kind of working hard in this way, how do I live? How do I use my practice as an anchor? What use do I make of this kind of awareness? Kind of noticing the storm, but not identifying with it, not going with it, not believing it so much. So, these historic and uncertain times. So it's a time of pandemic, which has made us all the more aware of the impact of systemic racism, of classism, that keeps a lot of workers in jobs where you can make minimum wage and still not be able to earn your living. Brought awareness of the so-called essential workers and BIPOC being exposed to the virus and dying with greater frequency, as compared to white people like me who kind of live at the end of a road and don't see many people anyway. So the questions for action of, what can I do to reduce the harm? What are the skillful actions if I cultivate the compassion, if I'm in touch with the suffering? Where do I move? And one way, of course, is to feed people. To feed people as in giving money to food banks and organizations preparing meals for healthcare workers, the elderly, other vulnerable groups. It's to provide input to our government officials to pass an economic relief package. Because I still hear people in the government saying that, the economy is fine, we're doing fine. But the we that is doing fine are the knowledge workers, are the people who can work from home. The people in nursing homes, the people in low-wage jobs, the so-called essential workers, the healthcare workers, they are not fine. And so how do I find ways to take action to help them be fine? There are historic and uncertain times, in the midst of the pandemic, the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, perhaps because people had more time at home to think things over, it really sparked something, an uprising of kind of public activism that we haven't really seen, I think, since the civil rights movement, or at least not in a long, long time. And so as a teacher of white awareness classes, I was suddenly deluged with all of these requests to talk, to give this class, to give that class. When we first started the classes at the East Bay Meditation Center, we struggled to attract 20 or 30 people. And I taught a class this last August and September with a colleague, and over 400 people signed up. And I would love to think that this is because I'm such a brilliant speaker or I'm super popular. But I think it's actually the topic and the venue and the time. And so for me, this kind of dovetails with what I've been doing. And so another action that I can take is to speak wisely. I hope it's wise. And to share with my own people, with white people, an understanding of the choices that we can make to support the system that leads to these murders or to disrupt it. That I can invite other white people to consider how we've been taught to be white, how we protect ourselves from understanding the harm that this does. And this teaching, taking the time to teach it, means not doing other things. So it's a choice. I hope it's a beneficial choice. But it's a moment when people are interested, and that's always the best time to teach them. So I realize that these 3 deaths are really just the tip of a terrible iceberg, and that I, as a white person, have been taught not to see them. And so when I reflect on what actions are suitable, the action of trying to speak about it, trying to raise awareness, trying to support other people to, reflect and make choices, that's one of the actions that I end up pursuing. So these are historic and uncertain times. Who would have thought that Georgia would have gone to Biden and Harris? So I've been reading more about it, about the sort of get out the vote work, and have been very inspired, by Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight, the New Georgia Project, Movement for Black Lives, Black Voters Matter, Rising Majority, as well as the support of Surge, of Showing Up for Racial Justice, and ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center, and lots of others. Because I see the Get Out the Vote as a way of inviting people, people who have been excluded, inviting them to speak, not proposing this or demanding this or guiding, but just saying, get out there and speak, let your views be known. So I think about Georgia, and, I'm not from the South, and I was raised actually in California and was more or less taught that, like, all the bad racist white people live in the South, which is certainly not true. But in Georgia, Black men were given the vote at the end of slavery. There was this very brief period of Reconstruction, it was really less than 10 years, when voting was possible, and then the federal government, the Northern interests, kind of abandoned Georgia, abandoned the South, and a revised system of violent control was put in place to keep Black people from voting. In the 1960s, it was still life-threatening for a Black person to try to vote. And more recently, there have been lots of other ways of trying to suppress votes, deregistering voters, disenfranchisement through mass incarceration, excluding felons from the vote, making it hard to get to polling places, all of these things. And so when I think about Georgia, I feel kind of inspired, and I start thinking about, well, are there actions that I can take to support people who, against history, against the odds, are actually willing to go out and cast a vote? So what actions would be skillful? What actions can I take that will reduce the harm and support life? I can certainly give money, write postcards, call white people, invite them to think about the meaning of their vote. Again, with the intention of lifting up, of nurturing, of inspiring, rather than the intention of defeating or beating or harming or winning. Because one of the things I've come to realize is that a lot of the political rhetoric is intended to inspire this storm in the mind, this unskillful identification with my side and their side, and my goodness and their badness. So historic and uncertain times. So all of this is happening against the backdrop of global warming, of climate change, and the greed of consumerism that drives us to use more and more resources, discharge more and more waste, drive bigger and bigger cars, pollute more and more. And in the early days of the pandemic shutdown, it was really interesting when air travel mostly stopped and the large cities around the world experienced a startling improvement in air quality. I myself have traveled to New Delhi, and usually the air there is such that you really can't see very far at all, even a few blocks down the street. And I saw pictures of Delhi where you could actually see the whole city. You could actually breathe there. And so here again, what are the actions? What would I do to disrupt the despoiling of resources? What would I do to disrupt the dramatic inequity in resource distribution? How does my practice help me? Does it help to buy sustainable clothing that's made by people who are paid a living wage? To live simply, to know what is enough? To realize that there, as a kind of white middle class person living in America, in the developed world, I have way, way more than I need. And how can I offer those resources to people working for environmental justice, to people who are suffering environmental harm, or working for legislation that supports animal life or holds companies responsible for the pollution they cause? So all of this is to say that I've come to realize more and more sort of the unconscious strategy that I had been using of allowing myself to be overwhelmed by all of this, to be lost in these stories, and to, in that way, kind of withdraw and stay comfortable, to try to kind of pacify the mind by saying, oh, it's too much, I'll just stay away. And instead, I can use my practice to actually observe the storm, to become aware of the clinging, of the wish to be safe or powerful or better than, aware of the emotions, of the impulses, and just observe, to maintain my capacity to discern wise from unwise, to make choices to relieve suffering, to try to work for the liberation of all beings. And so there's this quote, Rabbi Tarfon, who says, "It is not your responsibility to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you're not free to desist from it either." So I've sort of, my practice has helped me to see through this sort of grandiose wish to save the world, be some grand and famous heroic character, or to give up because I can't possibly, influence anything because it's such a complex system of causes and conditions. And so instead, my effort is to observe carefully, to see as clearly as possible, to let go as much as possible of the stories that get in the way, and to try to move in the world in a way that supports life, that reduces harm, that creates the conditions for all beings to be free. And so I invite you to share your responses. If you have questions or comments, I would love to hear how you are navigating these times, how your practice is helping you. And, I particularly invite the people who don't often speak in a group to speak, because I know that I know it may be different here, but I think it's customary in established groups that some people talk a lot and some people don't talk. So I would really like to especially invite people who don't usually talk. And you can, I think we're a small enough group, like you can just like raise your actual physical hand, or if you know how to work the little blue hand, I'm happy for you to raise the little blue hand, or you can also put something in the chat, and Sarah will help me keep track of what's in the chat. So I invite you, please share your experiences and your practice. Roberta, please. Yeah, you need to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
There you are. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I probably do speak more than some people, but it was a long pause.
It was. So go for it.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I think it's a very relevant and meaningful talk, one that I I personally feel committed to to be part of the whole tapestry of diversity, to work with people who are different, although it is very challenging for me to find myself not feeling and thinking I do know better by being a Biden Harris supporter.
I
It's
hear you. I hear you.
it's there. It's going to help other people more broadly, whereas the other side seems to be, less engaged that way. Um, I remember in the 70s, I think it was R.D. Laing's book, the political is the personal, or vice versa. And that really influenced me to really think about things politically as personal, to really be engaged from that place. To know that people in my community living in Oakland were affected by the environment where they live. There may be toxic waste distributed there where that wasn't so in the Piedmont Avenue area where I lived. And I thought a great deal about those things, and I still do. But I think our best thing, as you pointed out, is in our own mindfulness to have a practice where we can be observe and do what we are called to do, of course, in the world, but to really first notice and be aware. And I loved your talking about sitting on a redwood stump. Um, I feel I was a back the land person many years ago, and I often think of that as a place where I learned to be called to a refuge by the forest, by the trees. That's the most powerful influence in my life. And I was a tree saver back in the day,
Uh-huh.
still am, a tree hugger. So let us, it's hard not to feel that I'm better, superior, and I'm learning to take down the temperature and to talk to people. On Facebook, I can talk to people who have different points of view. It's not always easy. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Thank you for sharing that. Who else would like to speak? Dora Lee,
Noisy
please.
person. Jump in. Crystal,
Yes?
I've been thinking about the problem of plateauing. So you take up reading. I'm reading on anti-racism. There's political contributions, there's social contributions, and we make certain levels of efforts, and then we create a nest there. We're such nest builders. So I just was realizing that I'm sure looked at thinking about the things I have done, and then there's teaching, and I create a nest there and say, well, that's what I'm doing. And it becomes stale. So I have a problem with this being in a plateau and just making a little nest there. And I wonder if you could address that.
One of the things that I do that is extremely simple and practical is to make it so that I have input that disrupts my nest. So one of the things that I do is subscribe to newsletters. So two newsletters that have been really useful for me are the Root newsletter, which is Black-centered media. And the second is Native News Online, which is, as you might imagine, Native American news. And I find that what that does is it keeps in my mind an awareness of the experiences and lives of people who are living in very different causes and conditions than I am. And that keeps my mind moving. So one of the places that keeps me moving is both kind of in the interrogation of whiteness, but also now more the inquiry of class, because I'm realizing more and more how sort of the idea of class is kind of used as a way of kind of reifying the distribution of wealth. So that if people have classes, and it's like whiteness, race is used to divide people who have similar economic interests, so that people who have a lot of wealth can keep that wealth because we're all fighting about race. But to your without going on and on, like to your basic question, the thing I do is I try to have things come in that disrupt. So newsletters, part of the teaching, I switch out the teaching team. We have, I teach in different places with different people who have different views, obviously, since we're not all the same. So I don't know if that's helpful. Because the plateau is, it's like, I want to get comfortable. I do. And there are times when, we start a new class and I'm like, wow, do I really want to do all the work that is going to take? And I always get more out of it. Like I always learn by talking to people, which is why I like giving these talks and stuff. So I think that's what I would say about plateau. Dora Lee, are you still there? You are. Yes. Somehow people are moving around on my screen, so but I found you again.
Thank you. Well, one thing that's become more and more important to me is to somehow develop ways to have conversations with Republicans. I don't know, in September, there was myself, my husband, and another couple in Davis, we wrote this letter intended to speak to Republicans, inviting them to come and talk with us, just so we can appreciate each other's views, not try to change minds or anything. And I mean, we didn't distribute it widely, but only one Republican responded. And that just showed me more how difficult having those conversations is going to be going forward. But one of the things that's hard for me is that if, like, a Republican will say, I'm so disappointed that Trump lost because he's done so much for us. And it's like shocking to me. And I guess I'm trying to help myself, I guess, develop the capacity to say, I really want to understand what you mean when you say that.
Yeah. So are you familiar with Braver Angels?
Yes, and this is, I've participated in some of their programs, yeah.
Right, okay, good.
And that's a good avenue, and they have methodologies for engaging in these conversations.
Yeah.
Right.
I've also learned myself to move away from trying to convince people, kind of like you're talking, to like just have a conversation to understand, and to really cultivate a genuine curiosity. Like what do you feel he's done that's been helpful, and who's it been helpful for, and how did you come to have these views? Because clinging to views is one of the things that we are warned against, right? Yeah. I am convinced that I'm right, and I've also in my life been wrong very many times. And so I know that my view is not complete. I know that my view is not perfect. So if I can live in a way where I am doing what I feel is the best I can do, and still somehow leave space in my heart, mind for other people doing the same thing in ways that look really different, I think that's how to cultivate the ground to have the kind of conversations that you're hoping for. Because it is hard to understand. And I had a real awakening after the 2016 election. I just couldn't believe Trump had won, and I realized, I thought everyone thinks like I do, which they obviously don't. And that this couldn't happen, and that so on and so forth. And, I was also shocked and kind of got a real view of my own whiteness when I realized that, my Black friends, they weren't surprised. Most of my friends of color are like, yeah, what did you expect? And I thought, oh, so I'm living in a bubble of some kind, and I'm really not don't really have my finger on the pulse. And I need to kind of think about what it is that's allowed me to kind of, soothe myself in some little cocoon of people who agree with me. So I like that you're trying to step out and encounter the people who disagree with you, because that's one of the things that we need to do in order to really see things clearly. Because if we just talk to all the people who agree with us, that's very pleasant, but it doesn't rock your world. Thank you. Chris, please unmute yourself.
Well, I, as always, appreciate your words and your presence and your practice. And your wise observations. It's one of the kind of root practices and dilemmas of this time is how do you, if your life is devoted to the bodhisattva vow and you're demonizing the people on the other side, there's a problem here.
There's a problem.
and it's an ongoing, it's an ongoing, all the things that you described, and the storms and the the moment of relief of, oh my goodness, there's someone now at the top who has who seems to know the language of grief and of bridging with a really deep intention to try to bring that forward. And now, of course, we've already started the whole next cycle of, well, this isn't the end of anything. And not only that, those of us who identify as Democrats, there's a full spectrum of different views. And as a privileged white person, I know that I can have a certain view about, well, let's just slow this down and let's reach out and find how to walk forward together. And I can, I don't think I have any trouble imagining that there are also people saying we've been waiting a long time and let's not go to sleep here. So any wisdom you can offer about how to mindfully and heartfully enter this new time that we don't even know what it is, but we have some taste of it?
Well, I think it's kind of in, see, I thought you were going to offer me that kind of advice or support. So
oh, it's very mutual. We'll do it together. I'm in for that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with like staying open and steady, staying steady enough to be open, so that I can tolerate or even embrace being with people who I find disturbing, whose views I find disturbing. And I think the kind of the level of capacity for that varies a lot. I know it used to be quite impossible for me. It's becoming a lot more possible. And that kind of following the thread of the work brings me in touch with different things. And so by really trying to stay aware of, how is it that I'm engaging with these people, noticing when I'm getting really upset and angry, like, why is that? Like, what is it that's bringing that up? Again, kind of holding to the practices of non-harming, of generosity, of wise speech, of relieving suffering, and just noticing how we are kind of harried into performing like, good capitalist means of production and consuming and competing and, trying to be better than and so on and so forth. So I think to just keep choosing wise action and to choose wise comrades and to take refuge in the three jewels. Because there isn't a win, there isn't like an end where it's all going to be done. You know, Buddhism doesn't have a, you know, second coming or like a resolution. We're just moving along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a wise companion on the path.
Mary, please. That mute button can be so hard to find sometimes. Oh, there you are. Good.
I wanted to address the relationship with nature and point out, or with the other beings on the planet, including rocks and water and beings that we don't think of as living. And the work that Barton Stone has done, he's on this call this morning, and he has some land, and he has invited people to come at a particular time to gather on that land and to sit, find a place on the land to sit and just be with whatever part of the land you chose to be in. Then come back and gather and speak about what has spoken to you and how that particular place has communicated with you in any way. And I know he's back doing it. I haven't been able to go for a while, but I still think that this is a profound practice. But it focuses, I mean, there's a number of people who often go, so you are relating to human beings, but all those beings are relating to non-human beings in an overt attempt to be open to who and what they are. So I just wanted to wave a hand at Barton for coming up with that idea, and hope that I can get back to, I found that to be an amazing practice and help me understand people better too.
There are times when I find that puts things in like a relieving perspective. You know, there's this idea that somehow people are outside of nature or at war with nature, you know, because like we build houses and have clothes and stuff. And, you know, I think staying in nature and attuning to it is one way of getting appreciation of we're part of a very large system, most of which we have no understanding of. So all this idea that, you know, I know what's going on and I know what's happening, and I just don't think that's how it is. Thank you, Mary, for that observation. So we have a few more minutes. Who else would like to speak?
There's a question in the chat, Crystal, but it just came to me.
Oh, okay.
I can read it from Michael Little. Have we reached out to ask the quote losers how they feel, family, acquaintances, strangers putting their groceries in a car? Just a brief moment to listen to how they feel. I've been doing so, asking also to let me video the short interview.
Oh, I like the direct approach, you know, just, I mean, I guess I wouldn't necessarily address them as losers, but but yeah, just to, and again, not to try to convince them or change them, but to inquire, to really try to understand. So, Michael, are you, there you are connected. Would you like to say more about that? Because I love that idea. Okay. Thank you.
Maybe there's no mic or something.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that feel complete enough? And we can certainly let people know how to get in touch if there are things that come up after.
Yeah. Okay.
Michael's trying to connect to audio. Can somebody help him?
I can't do anything on my end. It looks like I don't have a way to even ask if her to unmute.
Yeah, I think because the sound isn't connected.
Yeah.
It's one of these frustrating things about Zoom.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Michael. I'm not sure if you can hear us actually.
Yeah.
But we did get that chat, and that does give this picture of a practice that's being engaged.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So last call for comments, and then I think a few minutes of announcements.
I'll put the closing.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the chat. There's a question. What are those newsletters again? Somebody wrote.
Yes, and there's an answer below that.
Ah.
The Root Newsletter, Native News, and Brayer Angels was the third organization that we mentioned today.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. And then we can do the closing chant, and I'm just gonna, just because of the echoing effect, I'll just mute those who, besides me and Charlie, will just do that. But please do it where you are with us. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless, I vow to realize it.